before I try to get some of the car routes that were requested, still sort of wrapping up some of this, if you can tell what I've been trying to do with the great inspiration of Kairoot. Last time, and it was rephrased tonight, there was a Kairoot last time that said it was difficult to get people to buy your newspaper if you had no newspaper for sale. And it was pointed out that under ordinary conditions, what people think toward all human activities is either to favor it, to condemn it, or to ignore it. Start off with the first part, that it's hard to get somebody, let's make it easy, on the basis that, not that you need it easy, but to get your mind, you've got to start somewhere, to say that there's an extreme problem to get somebody to buy your book if you've got no book to sell. As you might suspect, I was intending that a wee bit beyond the literal, because even at the literal level, I think even the most Philistine inclined among us would say, oh, that's true. But there is something else afoot. That is, it would be difficult, now may we press on closer to the area of Akron, or metaphors, and say that there's a problem to get people to buy your book if you have no book to sell. Now, we could make it right quick so that you know where you're stepping, since I can tell that thus far we've wasted, or I have, 3 or 4 minutes. If we were talking, I don't know, let me think of an example. Oh, how about this kind of stuff? Just for, well, I started to use door-to-door sales, but let's use this. If we were trying to, in some way, package this, little Kairoutian humor, if you were trying to sell this to somebody, if we say, we'll turn this into some kind of multi-level marketing scheme. Now I want all you people to take some transcripts or take a stack of Kairoots and go out door to door. Of course, have a sign saying, I don't have the watchtower with me, so they won't shoot you. And say, Kairoots, not the watchtower. And don't ride a bicycle and wear a black suit. Whoever those cats are. At any rate, so if I sent you out and said, go out and sell this. Now, regardless of me personally and how charming I look or how the show's done, forget all that. Just take this whole thing, philosophically speaking, just take this whole thing as a glob. How could you sell it if you attempted to be faithful just literally to what we talk about on the air and all the Kairoots? And you went to somebody and said, well, I have this sort of, because you'd have to start lying there if they said, well, out with it, man. What? Soap powder? No. Some kind of religion? Oh, no. A political party, a petition? You went, no. But the point is, let us say that by your demeanor, by the way that life works, that you've knocked on their door and they open the door and they say yes, and you're staying there, and to make it a little more, let's say you had these. You say, hello, I'm here. I would like to, and again they say, would you please come out with it, sir? I can't stand here all day. And you say, well, I have, this kind of thing that I thought you might be interested in. Well, of course, I assume you see part of it. If you've got nothing, now back to newspapers and books, I assume you see now what I was pointing at, it's hard to sell somebody something if you don't have anything to sell them. Or put back the other way, it's hard to get people to buy anything if you don't have anything to sell them. Now, that's to get us started, because that's not really the problem that I wanted to point to. But within a subheading in that would be, let us say, just for some more humor, 3 small problems. And if you don't like problems, 3 small pair of Italian shoes under that subheading. One is, there was a Kairoot tonight that pointed out, it was also tied to this, it may have seemed strange at the time, that said the difficulty out there is simply the difficulty in here. I assume that all of you will buy the beginning of that that would be almost impossible if in any way, just at your best shot, that if you tried in some way to present this to somebody, or some of you watching it on television, if you found it interesting enough, you've probably already been through it, and you tried to tell somebody, one of your good friends, an intellectual soulmate, and you tried to tell them about it, and probably you just ended up, if you tried to be faithful at all, and you had to say, well, you just got to watch it. You know, what can you say about it? So, I assume that, and what I just did about the door-to-door, you do understand that if you just, in your best conscientious manner, if you really take it as some sort of task, an experiment, I'll go out and try to get somebody interested in this, and I won't say any more than you've ever said or the Kairos ever said. Then, if you're knocking at the door, this is the way life is. Nothing wrong with it. But that was another difference pointing out between an artist and everybody else. Everyone else thinks for profit. Nothing wrong with it, but that's the nature of the city. It's advertising. And I mean that in the widest sense. It is skills. Everything, and even at the primary level, but as soon as you get in the secondary level, you have got the world of economics. You've got civilization. You've got to where you're no longer feeding yourself. You've raised more corn than you can eat, and now you're trying to sell it to somebody else. That is civilization. That is the secondary world finally alive. So, there's nothing wrong with it. It is the nature of the dance in the secondary world. The primary world, you meet somebody, and if you're accountable, you're going to kill them and eat them. Or at least you measure them. Or maybe you look at them, and if it's the opposite sex, you might look at them first and think, well, I'll screw her and then eat her. Kill her. The point is, there is no commerce going on. There is no sales pitch. You don't go up to somebody that you're going to kill because you want their woman or their food, if we're back to primary level. You don't go up to somebody and try to give them a sales pitch about, may I kill you? Or caveman, to make the crude cartoon, do not go up to women and say, could I sell you on the idea of me raping you? Of course, they didn't have the word rape. It's, could I sell you on the idea that I'm going to have sex with you regardless of what you have in mind? There is no sales involved. Once you get in the secondary world, which is this, of course, also, it's not just the world of commerce, but this has started. So now you've got the primary world still in existence. You've got the Eastern time zone, but now you've got Central Standard Time and everything else running simultaneously. This is involved with sales. Anything you do at the secondary level, you have got to some degree, sell somebody. And we've been through that. It's the difference. You don't have to sell people on eating. If they're hungry, they will eat. If it gets bad enough, they may start looking at you, thinking, wow, you don't look so bad. And you have to realize that cannibalism is not absolutely out of the question at the primary level. But when you get past eating into dining, that is, eating a particular food, then you've got to sell. That's what advertising is. They're not selling the fact of eating General Mills, Duncan Hines. They're not saying the fact. They're not saying people eat. It's our best interest. This is a public service announcement. We want you to eat. No, they have to say, we want you to eat this. So there you are, if you were trying to sell somebody else. And if it's a secondary world, you can say it's not sales, but it's sell. You understand that they assume. That's why I said that the whole milieu, if you're knocking on the door and you got something in your hand, you don't like you're bleeding or you don't have the keys to your car like you had a car wreck, if you're standing there with a box and they don't know what it is or some papers, as soon as they open the door, they know that's the nature of life, that you want them to buy something. It turns out, though, you don't have anything to sell. What are you going to do? Now, if we've established that, back to where I wanted to point out the three possible pairs of shoes from the Mediterranean area. Problems. What was that? Difficulties. Interesting curios. Now, forget all that because there's no great interest, need, or of ever trying to sell this to people. But now consider that what's true out there, I assume you follow it, that if you tried to just be faithful to what just the Kairos, and you tried to go tell somebody about, boy, this is a whole thing, you go to hear all these things and what it'll do, well, guess what? And if you're really trying to be faithful, you understand they're wanting to be sold, or at least they want to hear the sales pitch, and then you'd start going, well, and you'd try to back off. And you'd end up that there it is, as far as they're concerned, he's trying to sell me something, which is the nature of the secondary world. They would not be untoward in that thinking. And so they say, all right, he's trying to sell me something. And let's assume that they are somewhat impartial when it starts, like, well, I don't know whether I want to buy it or not. I don't know what it is, so tell me. And the more they press about, well, what is it? I'm not going to commit myself. I'm not even going to throw you off my yard yet. What is it? And the more they ask, the more you withdraw. The more they try to say, well, wait a minute. Is this like so-and-so? Well, no. Well, wait a minute. In that case, it must be like so-and-so. And you go, well, no. Well, wait a minute. That only leaves a couple of possibilities. That means it must be. And you go, no. And there it is. As far as they're concerned, you're there asking them to dance. And as soon as they even show any sign like, well, I might, but at least are we going to tango, going to waltz, or what? And the more they ask, the more you go, well, and yet you don't go away. It's like, you understand. It's like, well, the person is trying to sell me something, but what the hell is it? And the more I ask them, the more they go, well. No. The difficulty out there is the difficulty within. Now, forget all that. What is it? There were several colleagues tonight that said, to point out the only thing that inspires, the only thing that should be driving a real revolutionist is what? The love of the revolution, whatever that means. The only reason a person should be trying to think in a new way is not for profit, it's for pleasure. But consider, why, now forget people. You see the reality of that. You've got to. Now consider what has taken place and continues to run inside of your own up at the end of this trompe-l'oeil cul-de-sac of your mind thinking, well, I'm here on the throne. If there's anything to be thought and done, I know what it is. And so you try to deal with it. You bring your brain here, most of you do. You bring your body here and you see the taping. Some of you sit there on TV and you perhaps, for all I know, purposely turn on this thing. And you have your body and your mind and your hand there with your clicker. And let's assume that, just generally speaking, you brought your brain with it. But now what's involved? It's like your brain is assuming. It's what the nervous system does, like everybody else up here, is, all right, you're trying to sell me something. If you just turn on the regular TV comedy, your brain just assumes, well, you're trying to sell me entertainment. Hey, I'll buy it because it doesn't cost anything. All you got to do is kind of, mellow out, just kind of slice down. In other words, with most people, just be yourself. Take this, what it naturally does and calls it thinking, take that as thinking. So, you've got your brain now, and you're trying to, by, let's assume, following this kind of stuff, listening to Kairos, and trying to think on your own in some way that's not either condemning what you're thinking about, not favoring it, and yet not ignoring it. But now you're faced with this, in a sense, your brain. And when I say in a sense, it literally is, of course your brain doesn't use any terms like this, that you give it new information, you're trying to sell it something. You go to school, you don't think about it this way, but if you go back and sign up for school now and go at night, you got to tell your brain something. It all happens like this, and you don't think about it. Your brain, of course your body's the one that thinks it is. You mean I'm going to work all day and then I'm going down to school at night? Are you nuts? Why? And you have to tell it why. All right? The coming thing is now is cosmic accounting. And if we get on the ground floor now, we'll get rich and we won't have to work that damned old job over there at the plastic plant. And so your brain and your body goes, well, all right. It's either that or watch TV. In other words, you had to sell it. You had to sell it something new, right? And it bought it. Now you try to sell it something that seems to have no point. You try to sell it a plan that seems to go nowhere. You try to get it to engage in some new activity that leads nowhere. You try to get involved with some sort of struggle to which there is no end. You see, now the difficulty is within, not out there. Don't worry about trying to sell somebody else on this. That'd be cheap. I mean, absolutely foolish, but it'd be cheap. This is even cheaper. That is, even cruder, chintzier. But notice you're faced with it constantly as your brain thinks, well, what the hell's the point? But anybody that has the potential of a real revolutionist, you don't give up. You don't think about it this way, but you then start playing the part I did. It's like you going, well, let's go back one more time. And your brain says, well, why? And the more it says why, it's like you're trying to be truthful. And the more you have to say, well, I don't know. And it says, well, what do you mean you don't know? And the more it says you don't know, the more you go, yeah, I don't know. And it says, well, why? 5 minutes for 2 more. Well, I had 2. Of course, I can make it 3 or 5 or 1. I can just say, well, that was it. Who's going to remember? But I was trying to tie in several that we had hit. That number 2 of the Italian shoes was sense, revolutionist thinking. Now, let's bypass the first one and assume that, now and then that you doing something approaching it, which you do, or you wouldn't keep coming here and stay sane. You could come here and go absolutely bonkers, But of course, by then, things work out, right? We would have all moved and not told you where we went, that kind of thing. So all of you know something about thinking in a way that is not polar-based, that a way that's not just different and weird, but is actually new. That is, in such a way that if you suddenly turn yourself and say, why did you think that? You'd go, because you don't know. But then if you went, are you ever going to do that again? You'd think, that is, you'd think, you enjoyed that, didn't you? And you'd think, all right. The thing about it, that revolution is thinking, now that along this line, if you'll follow, since it is not, literally, and you can see that, is not ever involved when whatever it is that you would think about, and the only things you think about specifically are secondary affairs. You no longer think about primary because primary don't need to be thought about. They do without thought. But anyway, whatever you think about is human activity. Whatever you think about is local activity. It is part of the collective activity. It's part of the secondary world. And ordinary thinking can only think about human affairs, the secondary world, by either whatever it's thinking about that comes to its attention. It either favors it, condemns it, or ignores it. It hears about it and just saying, I'm not interested. That's the three possibilities. Now doing that to yourself, now trying to say yourself on doing this, and you don't say yourself on, well, if we take up thinking in you, it'll give us more ammunition, it'll give me more intellectual, a better intellectual basis to attack conservative politics. Let's just say that's how you're wired up, that's your hobby in life. You understand? Well, whatever it is, or to condemn, how about just in general, to be a bigger, better informed, more astute, more viper-tongued critic of life. I'll be able to cut people to shreds. I'll be able to criticize anybody. I'll be the world's outstanding, or at least in this part of the world, outstanding smartass, cynic. You try to say yourself on thinking in you, and there is no sales point. That you're not going to be able to condemn something better. You're not going to be now a better defender of your position. And plus, you're obviously not ignoring whatever it is you're thinking about, or you wouldn't be thinking about it. What? I didn't make it too complex. If you're thinking ordinarily, which all of you can still do, we can talk about you, we can talk about everybody thinking ordinarily. Whatever you think about, the only thing you think, whatever comes to your attention, whatever you hear about, whatever you turn around and see, you either favor it, condemn it, or you see it and you're not interested, that is, you ignore it. If you try to do this, if you try to think anew, you have deposed the king and replaced him with nobody. Then what it is you're thinking about is not favoring what you think about, it's not condemning it, and it's not ignoring it. What the hell is left? What would drive the intellect then down that kind of brand new, not a cul-de-sac, but it might as well be, because ordinary intellect looks down that way and it goes, where in the hell is the end of this? And of course there is none, but it keeps thinking, well, geez, what would drive you then? One thing, the pleasure of it. It is the ultimate profit. But how can you describe it? You certainly can't go sell it to somebody and say, do this, you'll enjoy it. They go, hey, hey, what do I look like? What's the trick? What's the real cost? You know, not just the cost. When first you say, well, it doesn't even cost anything. We don't get metaphysical with people and say, well, it cost everything you got. They go, some kind of fundamental Christianity then, that kind of crap again. So let's get past the cost. You can say, well, we'll worry about that later. You can owe me. And they go, well, I'll go for that. But then their next question is always, then what's the payoff? Then they got you. And you ask yourself, what's the payoff? The payoff is it's fun. And if you try to pull that on other people out there and they go, right. Yeah. All right, what is it? What is it? Fun's no payoff. Plus, it's open to question. It's relative. Not real fun. Okay, good night.